To the fundamentals of SQL. We are in the SQL statement foundation section, and we are on the limit statement. So the goal of the limit statement, kind of like it sounds, is to just limit the number of records returned. I know that we used this in our first lesson with the select statement, and now we're going to dive a little bit deeper into how it works. So the limit clause isn't supported in all SQL databases. So for databases such as SQL Server or Microsoft Access, you use the select top statement to limit your results. So if you're using those later on, whether that's at work or whether that's at school, just Google the syntax. It's very simple, very similar to the limit. So the general syntax of a limit statement is, so we select our column names from our shopping list from our specified table. Maybe we give it a condition using a where statement. We order the column names, and then we finally limit, and we give the number of rows as an integer. So for our example, we're going to use the film table in our sample DVD rental database. We can check out all the information from our film table by selecting our DDN data warehouse, going to public, and selecting DVD film. If you're using other databases in work or in school, you might have to write out a select all statement and limit it to 10 rows just so you can identify the columns. But in Snowflake, the great thing is that you can just see all of the columns that you're using, their data types, and their row count. So for this first example, we're going to gather all the information. We're going to order it by the film titles and limit it to the first 10 rows. We did this in our early select statement, and we're just going to do it again. So we know that we are, capitalize, gathering all the information from our DVD film table, and we're going to sort it or order it by the titles, and let's just order them from A to Z so we can write ascending. Remember that if you don't write ascending or descending, if you don't specify, it's going to default as ascending. And then we can limit to 10 rows. So all we have to do is write limit and then our integer for how many rows we want to limit it to. So this gives us 10 rows. Now in other programming languages, if you are limiting or using the between statement, sometimes it's not going to gather all, let's say 10 rows. It might go 1 through 9. But with SQL, if you're limiting to 10 rows, it's going to select all of those 10 rows and return them. So we have our title, we have all of our information, and the titles are ordered ascending, and it's the first 10. Great. So let's use another example using the film table. And we're going to grab a few different things, and then we're going to order it by our film ID, and we're going to just grab the first 50 rows. So we're going to grab the film ID, the title of each film, the description, and their rating. We're going to sort it by film ID from least to greatest, and I want you to think about how we could do that. And then we're going to limit it to the first 50 rows. So just pause and think, what do you think the correct syntax is going to be for this query before you type it out and I write it out? You can pause the video here if you want to take 5 to 10 seconds to think on that. I'm going to start writing. So I know that my shopping list is the film ID, the title, the description of the film, and the rating. We are using the DVD film table. We are ordering it by, or we're sorting by film ID from least to greatest. I'm going to call out ascending just so I can have it there, and it can always remind me of what I'm actually doing. And when you get a little bit more comfortable, you can kind of develop your own quirks in your language when you're writing SQL statements. But I usually like to call things out just because it makes it more organized for me. And then finally, we limit it to the first 50 rows. So we have our limit statement, and we just type it out as an integer. Now we run this, and I want to think about what are we expected to return. Are we going to get all the columns back? Are we going to get 4 columns back? What is going to happen? So we have our 4 columns: film ID, title, description, and rating. And it returned 50 rows because we limited it to 50 rows. Now, I want you to think about how would the query change if our limit value was 35. Great. So the query would change because instead of limiting to 50 rows, we would limit it down to 35 rows. So if we just want to change our query and write that out just to see what would happen, we can do that. Notice how it returns 35 rows rather than 50. You can play around with this, and you're going to have some practice problems really to solidify this understanding. So let's do another example, and let's filter this query just a little bit further. We're going to be pulling the same data, but we only want titles that have a rating of G. So remembering that when we want to filter our data, we need to use the where clause. So let's think about what the SQL syntax would look like for this query. I'm just going to put a few spaces in here so we can see. So we are selecting the same things: film ID, title, description, rating, from our DVD film table, where our where clause has to come before our order by clause. So we want where the titles have a rating of G. So remembering, I need to call my column name, so where title is equal to that logical operator, G. Then we're going to order by our film ID, ascending, and let's limit it to 50. So we run this query, we get 0 rows. Why do we get 0 rows? Oh, we're not using our title. My apologies. Our rating needs to be G. Title's not G. Everybody makes mistakes. This is how we learn. So now we have our film ID, our title, our description, and our rating. Our film ID, we gave it that order ascending. So it's going to be least to greatest, 2 through 999 with 178 rows, and all of the ratings are G. So that means we have 178 films that have a rating of G. Just remember, when we are using the limit statement, you are just limiting the number of records returned. It's not supported in all of the SQL databases, and you might have to use the select top statement to limit your results. So if you get an error when you're using the limit statement, depending on the database, just do a simple Google search, and you should be able to get the correct syntax. Thanks, and I will see you in the next lecture.